Welcome to Indigenous Love Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's begin today's story. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered wooden platform that stood like a monument to human cruelty in the center of Copper Ridge. Dust swirled in lazy spirals around the boots of gathered men, their faces hardened by frontier life, and something darker that lived in the spaces between conscience and commerce. The air hung thick with the scent of sage and the metallic tang of fear that seemed to emanate from the iron restraints glinting in the harsh light. From his position on the ridge overlooking the settlement, the warrior watched through eyes that had witnessed too many sunrises over scenes such as this. His weathered hands gripped the smooth stock of his rifle, the weapon that had been his companion through countless hunts and the guardian of his people's sacred grounds. The morning breeze carried whispers of his ancestors, voices that spoke of honor and the sacred duty to protect those who could not protect themselves. Below, the woman stood with a dignity that defied her circumstances. Her auburn hair caught the light like burnished copper, and though her wrists bore the cruel marks of iron, her spine remained unbowed. She wore the remnants of what had once been a fine dress, now torn and stained by the journey that had brought her to this moment. Yet something in her bearing spoke of an inner strength that no chain could diminish, a flame that burned bright, despite the darkness that surrounded her. The warrior's keen eyes studied the faces of the men below, reading the intentions written in their expressions like tracks in sand. There was the merchant with soft hands and calculating eyes, the rancher whose cruelty was whispered about in taverns, and others whose very presence seemed to darken the morning light. Each represented a different kind of captivity, a different shade of suffering that awaited the woman on the platform. His horse shifted restlessly beneath him, sensing the tension that radiated from its rider like heat from sun-baked stone. The animal's dark coat gleamed with the sweat of their hard ride through the night, following rumors and whispered intelligence that had led them to this place of commerce in human souls. The warrior's fingers traced the intricate beadwork on his rifle's leather sling, each bead a prayer offered by the women of his tribe for the safe return of their protector. The auctioneer's voice carried across the settlement like the call of a carrion bird, his words transforming a human being into mere property to be bartered and sold. The warrior's jaw tightened as he watched the woman's reaction to the degrading spectacle, noting how she lifted her chin higher with each crude assessment of her worth. In that gesture, he recognized something of his own people's refusal to be broken by those who sought to claim dominion over the free. Around the platform, the crowd grew restless with anticipation, their voices creating a low murmur that reminded the warrior of distant thunder before a storm. He had seen such gatherings before, had witnessed the way civilized men could transform into something far more savage than any wild creature that roamed the plains. The irony was not lost on him that those who called his people savage were the ones who traded in human flesh beneath the banner of law and order. The rifle in his hands represented more than a weapon. It was the culmination of successful hunts that had fed his tribe through harsh winters, the tool that had defended their sacred places from those who would desecrate them for gold or land. Its value could not be measured in the white man's currency, for it carried within its steel and wood the very essence of survival and protection that defined his existence. As the morning progressed and the auction drew nearer to its climax, the warrior made his decision. He had come to this place following the guidance of dreams and the council of elders who spoke of moments when a single act of courage could alter the course of many lives. The woman below was not of his people, yet something in her defiant stance called to the part of him that recognized kindred spirits across the boundaries of race and culture. The path down to the settlement stretched before him like a thread of destiny, each step he would take carrying the weight of choice and consequence. Behind him lay the safety of the high country and the familiar rhythms of tribal life. Ahead waited uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of redemption for both himself and the woman whose fate hung in the balance like morning mist before the rising sun. The warrior's descent from the ridge carried with it the gravity of ancestral judgment, each hoofbeat against the rocky terrain marking time like the steady rhythm of ceremonial drums. His horse navigated the treacherous path with the sure-footed grace of a creature born to mountain trails, while its rider's mind traveled paths far more complex than any physical terrain. The rifle across his back seemed to grow heavier with each step closer to the settlement, not from its physical weight, but from the magnitude of what its sacrifice would represent. In the growing heat of the morning, memories surfaced like mirages in the desert of his consciousness. He recalled the day his grandfather had placed this very weapon in his young hands, the old man's weathered fingers guiding his own along the smooth barrel while speaking of responsibility and the sacred trust between protector and protected. The rifle had been crafted by a master gunsmith in the Eastern Territories, its steel forged with a precision that spoke of both artistry and deadly purpose. Every component had been selected with care, from the walnut stock carved with symbols of his clan to the brass fittings that caught sunlight like captured stars. The woman on the platform below had not moved from her position of quiet defiance, though the warrior could see the subtle signs of exhaustion that spoke of sleepless nights and the constant vigilance required to maintain dignity in the face of dehumanization. Her dress, once the color of summer sky, now bore the stains of a journey that had stripped away everything except the core of who she was. Yet in her stillness, he recognized the same quality he had observed in wild horses just before they chose between flight and fight, a coiled energy waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The crowd around the auction block had grown larger as word spread through the settlement like wildfire through dry grass. Men emerged from saloons and trading posts, their faces bearing the marks of frontier life and something hungrier that the warrior had learned to recognize in those who viewed other human beings as commodities. Women watched from doorways and windows, their expressions a complex mixture of sympathy, fear, and the helpless anger of those who understood their own precarious position in a world where strength too often determined worth. As his horse picked its way down the final stretch of the descent, the warrior's thoughts turned to the weapon that had become an extension of his very soul. This rifle had brought down elk in the high meadows during the lean months when his people faced starvation. Its accuracy had turned the tide in skirmishes with rival tribes and the encroaching settlers who viewed native lands as empty spaces waiting to be claimed. The weapon had been blessed by medicine men and had drunk the smoke of sacred fires, making it more than mere metal and wood. It had become a repository of his people's survival and his own identity as their guardian. The settlement of Copper Ridge sprawled before him like a wound in the earth, its buildings constructed from timber, torn from sacred groves and stones, quarried from mountains that his ancestors had considered the dwelling places of spirits. Smoke rose from chimneys and forge fires, creating a haze that seemed to blur the line between earth and sky. The very air tasted of commerce and compromise, of dreams deferred and principles abandoned in the pursuit of gold and land. The auctioneer's platform stood at the heart of this moral wasteland like an altar to human greed, its wooden planks stained dark with the sweat and tears of countless souls who had stood where the woman now waited. The warrior could see the crude construction of the restraining post, the iron rings worn smooth by the struggles of those who had been chained there before. Each mark and stain told a story of suffering that his people's oral traditions would preserve long after the wood had rotted and the settlement had returned to dust. His rifle represented more than personal loss. It embodied the accumulated wisdom and protection of generations. The weapon had been present at treaty signings, where his people had traded vast territories for promises written on paper that proved as fragile as autumn leaves. It had stood guard during the long nights when disease brought by strangers had ravaged his village, and it had been the instrument of justice when raiders had threatened the sacred places where his people's ancestors rested. The morning sun climbed higher, casting shorter shadows and intensifying the heat that seemed to press down upon the settlement like the weight of collective guilt. The warrior could feel the eyes of unseen watchers tracking his progress, could sense the subtle shift in the crowd's attention as his presence registered in their peripheral awareness. He was no longer merely an observer on the ridge. He had become a participant in whatever drama was about to unfold in the dust and moral ambiguity of Copper Ridge. The distance between himself and the auction platform continued to shrink, each moment bringing him closer to a decision that would echo through the remainder of his days and perhaps beyond, into the stories his people would tell around winter fires when the wind howled through the mountains and the spirits of the ancestors walked among the living. The warrior's arrival at the edge of the settlement created ripples of awareness that spread through the gathered crowd like stones cast into still water. His presence commanded attention not through any overt display of aggression, but through the quiet authority that emanated from a man who had learned to move through the world with the confidence of one who understood his place within the greater tapestry of existence. The morning light caught the intricate beadwork adorning his leather vest, each pattern telling stories of hunts completed and battles survived, of ceremonies witnessed and vows undertaken. His horse, a magnificent paint stallion with markings that seemed to mirror the warrior's own spiritual journey, stood with the patient stillness of an animal that had learned to trust completely in its rider's judgment. The creature's dark eyes surveyed the settlement with an intelligence that spoke of countless miles traveled together across terrain both physical and metaphysical. Steam rose from the animal's flanks in the warming air, evidence of their hard ride through the pre-dawn darkness that had brought them to this moment of convergence. The woman on the platform had noticed his arrival, though she gave no outward sign of recognition or hope. Her training in the social graces of a world far removed from this crude frontier had taught her to school her features into a mask of composure, yet the warrior's experienced eyes could read the subtle signs of a spirit that refused to surrender despite the degradation of her circumstances. Her hands, though bound, maintained an elegant positioning that spoke of piano lessons and tea services, of a life that had once included beauty and refinement before fate had cast her into this maelstrom of human commerce. The auctioneer, a man whose corpulent frame spoke of prosperity built upon the suffering of others, had begun his preliminary assessment of the merchandise before him. His practiced eye catalogued attributes with the cold efficiency of one who had reduced countless human beings to mere inventories of potential labor and other services. The warrior observed this ritual of dehumanization with the detached fascination of a naturalist studying the behavior of predatory creatures, noting how the man's gestures and expressions revealed the corruption that had taken root in his soul like a cancer. Around the platform, the crowd had arranged itself in a rough semicircle, their positioning revealing the social hierarchies and economic interests that governed life in Copper Ridge. The wealthier merchants and ranchers occupied the prime viewing positions closest to the platform, their fine clothes and well-fed appearances marking them as the settlement's elite. Behind them pressed the working men, their faces bearing the permanent squints and weathered complexions of those who labored under the harsh frontier sun. At the periphery lurked figures whose very presence seemed to darken the morning light, men whose intentions could be read in the hungry gleam of their eyes and the predatory way they studied the woman's form. The warrior's rifle rested across his saddle with the casual ease of a tool so familiar that it had become an extension of his own body. The weapon's polished stock gleamed in the sunlight, its surface marked with the small scars and wear patterns that spoke of years of faithful service. The brass fittings had been polished to a mirror shine, and the barrel bore the subtle markings of a master craftsman who had understood that true artistry lay not in ornamentation, but in the perfect marriage of form and function. As the preliminary proceedings continued, the warrior found himself studying the faces of the women who watched from doorways and windows throughout the settlement. In their expressions, he read the complex emotions of those who understood all too well the precarious nature of their own positions in a world where strength and wealth determined worth. Some showed sympathy for the woman on the platform, while others displayed the hardened indifference of those who had learned to protect themselves by refusing to acknowledge the suffering of others. A few revealed the bitter satisfaction of those who found comfort in seeing others brought low, as if another's degradation somehow elevated their own circumstances. The morning air carried the mingled scents of sage and dust, of wood smoke and human sweat, creating an olfactory tapestry that would forever be associated in the warrior's memory with this moment of decision. The sounds of the settlement provided a discordant symphony, the creak of leather and wood, the stamp of horses' hooves, the low murmur of voices discussing the proceedings with the casual indifference reserved for livestock auctions and commodity trading. His grandfather's teachings echoed in his mind, like the distant sound of ceremonial chanting, reminding him that there were moments in every life when the path forward required sacrifice of the most precious possessions. The old man had spoken of times when the spirits tested the resolve of their chosen protectors, presenting them with choices that would define not only their own destinies, but the fate of those whose voices had been silenced by circumstance and cruelty. The auction was about to begin in earnest, and the warrior knew that the moment for action was approaching, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The moment arrived with the inexorable certainty of sunrise, marked not by any dramatic flourish, but by the subtle shift in the crowd's attention, as the auctioneer raised his gavel like a judge preparing to render sentence. The warrior felt the weight of generations pressing upon his shoulders, the accumulated wisdom of ancestors who had faced their own moments of moral reckoning in times when the world seemed balanced on the edge of a knife. His horse sensed the change in its rider's posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of muscles that preceded decisive action. The woman on the platform had closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in what appeared to be a moment of private communion with whatever faith had sustained her through the trials that had brought her to this place. The morning light played across her features, revealing the delicate bone structure that spoke of gentle breeding and the subtle lines around her eyes that suggested she had known both laughter and sorrow in equal measure. Her breathing remained steady despite the circumstances, each inhalation and exhalation a quiet act of defiance against those who sought to reduce her to mere property. The warrior's hands moved with practiced precision as he dismounted, his movements flowing with the fluid grace of one who had learned to exist in harmony with both the natural world and the demands of survival. The rifle came away from his saddle with the reverent care reserved for sacred objects, its familiar weight settling into his grip like the hand of an old friend. The weapon had been his constant companion through seasons of plenty and times of desperate want, through the long watches of winter nights when wolves howled in the darkness, and the shorter, more dangerous encounters with men whose hearts had grown as cold as the mountain peaks. Around him, the crowd's murmur took on a different quality, as awareness of his presence spread through the gathered assembly, like ripples expanding across a still pond. The warrior could feel their eyes upon him, could sense the mixture of curiosity, wariness, and barely concealed hostility that his appearance had generated. To these people, he represented something beyond their understanding, a reminder of the world that had existed before their settlements and trading posts had carved civilization from the wilderness according to their own narrow definitions. The auctioneer's voice had taken on the rhythmic cadence of his profession, each word calculated to extract maximum value from the human merchandise displayed before the crowd. The warrior observed this ritual of commodification with the detached fascination of one studying the behavior of creatures whose motivations remained fundamentally alien to his own understanding of the world. The man's gestures were theatrical, designed to inflame the basest instincts of his audience, while maintaining the veneer of legitimate commerce that allowed them to participate without acknowledging the moral bankruptcy of their actions. The rifle in the warrior's hands represented more than mere monetary value. It embodied the accumulated trust of his people and the sacred responsibility that had been placed upon his shoulders from the moment he had first proven himself worthy of carrying such a weapon. The steel had been blessed in ceremonies that connected it to the spiritual realm, and the wood had been carved with symbols that served as conduits for the protection of the ancestors. To offer such a weapon in trade was to surrender a piece of his very soul, yet the warrior understood that some sacrifices transcended personal loss and entered the realm of moral necessity. The woman's composure remained unbroken, despite the degrading spectacle unfolding around her, her dignity intact like a flame that burned too brightly to be extinguished by the crude attempts of lesser spirits to diminish its radiance. The warrior recognized in her bearing the same quality he had observed in the great eagles that soared above the mountain peaks, a nobility that remained untouchable regardless of the circumstances that might temporarily constrain their freedom. The crowd's attention had begun to focus on the bidding process, their voices creating a cacophony of greed and desire that seemed to pollute the morning air like smoke from a poorly tended fire. The warrior could see the calculations taking place behind their eyes, the cold arithmetic of human worth reduced to dollars and cents, labor potential and other considerations that transformed a living soul into an entry in a ledger book. His approach toward the platform carried with it the weight of destiny, each step measured and deliberate like the movements of a dancer performing a sacred ritual. The rifle remained cradled in his arms with the reverent care of a priest carrying a holy relic, its presence commanding a respect that transcended the crude materialism of the auction proceedings. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting shorter shadows and intensifying the heat that seemed to press down upon the settlement like the breath of some vast, invisible presence. The moment of exchange was approaching, with the inevitability of seasonal change, and the warrior felt the spirits of his ancestors gathering around him like witnesses to an act that would echo through the generations yet to come. The warrior's approach to the auction platform created a silence that spread through the crowd, like the hush that precedes a thunderstorm. His footsteps against the packed earth seemed to echo with supernatural clarity, each impact resonating through the settlement as if the very ground recognized the significance of what was about to unfold. The rifle in his hands caught the morning light, its polished surfaces reflecting the sun's rays in patterns that danced across the faces of the assembled witnesses like fragments of captured fire. The auctioneer's practiced rhythm faltered as he became aware of the figure moving through the crowd with purposeful determination. The man's eyes, accustomed to reading the intentions and financial capabilities of potential bidders, struggled to categorize this new presence that seemed to exist outside the familiar parameters of frontier commerce. The warrior's bearing spoke of wealth measured in different currencies than gold or silver, of values that transcended the crude materialism that governed life in settlements like Copper Ridge. The woman on the platform had opened her eyes, and for the first time since the proceedings had begun, something resembling hope flickered in their depths, like starlight reflected in still water. She had recognized something in the warrior's approach that spoke to a part of her spirit that had remained untouched by the degradation of her circumstances. Her breathing deepened slightly, as if she were drawing strength from some invisible source that had suddenly made itself available to her in this moment of extremity. The crowd parted before the warrior's advance, with the instinctive deference that prey animals show to apex predators, their movements creating a clear path to the platform while maintaining a respectful distance from this figure who seemed to carry with him the authority of natural law. The merchants and ranchers who had been preparing to bid found themselves reassessing their positions, their calculations disrupted by the introduction of an element they had not anticipated and could not easily quantify. The rifle's significance became apparent to those with eyes to see as the warrior drew closer to the platform. The weapon's craftsmanship spoke of value that extended far beyond its monetary worth, its every component selected and assembled with the care reserved for objects that would serve not merely as tools, but as extensions of their owner's very essence. The brass fittings gleamed like captured sunlight, and the stock's grain patterns seemed to flow like water frozen in wood, creating a visual symphony that spoke of artistry elevated to the level of spiritual expression. The auctioneer's voice had taken on a different quality, uncertainty creeping into the practiced cadence as he struggled to maintain control over proceedings that seemed to be slipping beyond his ability to direct. The man's experience had taught him to recognize the various types of bidders who frequented such events, but the warrior represented something entirely outside his frame of reference, a force that operated according to principles that had nothing to do with profit margins or return on investment. The morning air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation as the warrior reached the base of the platform, his presence creating ripples of awareness that spread through the assembled crowd like waves expanding from a stone cast into still water. The weapon in his hands had become more than mere metal and wood. It had transformed into a symbol of sacrifice and redemption, of values that transcended the crude materialism that had reduced a human being to merchandise to be bartered and sold. The woman's eyes met those of the warrior for a brief moment, and in that exchange passed an understanding that required no words to convey its meaning. She saw in his gaze the reflection of her own unbroken spirit, the recognition of one soul acknowledging another across the artificial barriers that society had erected to separate and categorize human worth. The warrior saw in her bearing the same nobility that he had observed in the great creatures of the wilderness, a dignity that remained intact despite the attempts of lesser beings to diminish its radiance. The rifle's weight seemed to increase as the moment of offering approached, not from any physical change, but from the accumulation of meaning that had gathered around this act of sacrifice. The weapon represented more than personal loss. It embodied the warrior's commitment to principles that elevated the protection of the innocent above personal comfort or security. The morning sun had reached its zenith, casting the entire scene in harsh, unforgiving light that seemed to strip away pretense and reveal the true nature of each participant in this drama of human commerce and moral choice. The moment of exchange had arrived, and with it came the weight of consequences that would ripple through time like stones cast into the still waters of eternity. The warrior's ascent to the platform carried with it the gravity of ritual, each step measured and deliberate, like the movements of a shaman approaching a sacred altar. The wooden planks creaked beneath his moccasined feet, the sound seeming to echo through the settlement with supernatural clarity, as if the very earth were bearing witness to this moment of moral reckoning. The rifle remained cradled in his arms, with the reverent care of one carrying a holy relic, its polished surfaces catching and reflecting the harsh midday light in patterns that seemed to dance with their own inner fire. The auctioneer's corpulent frame had begun to show signs of perspiration that spoke not merely of the climbing temperature, but of the nervous tension that had infected the proceedings like a fever. His practiced eye struggled to assess the value of the weapon being offered, his experience with frontier commerce providing no framework for understanding an exchange that operated according to principles entirely foreign to his worldview. The man's fingers drummed against his gavel with increasing frequency, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his growing uncertainty about how to proceed with negotiations that had moved beyond his ability to control or comprehend. The woman's breathing had steadied into the deep, measured rhythm of one who had found an unexpected source of strength in the midst of despair. Her eyes remained fixed upon the warrior's face, reading in his weathered features the story of a life lived according to codes of honor that transcended the crude materialism of frontier society. The iron restraints that bound her wrists seemed to have lost some of their weight, as if the very possibility of freedom had begun to transform the metal from instruments of oppression into mere temporary inconveniences. The crowd's murmur had taken on a different quality, uncertainty replacing the earlier atmosphere of predatory anticipation as the assembled bidders struggled to understand the nature of the transaction unfolding before them. The merchants and ranchers who had come prepared to engage in the familiar ritual of human commerce found themselves confronted with something that operated according to entirely different principles, a form of exchange that elevated moral consideration above financial calculation. The rifle's significance became increasingly apparent as the warrior held it aloft for all to see, its craftsmanship speaking of value that extended far beyond mere monetary worth. The weapon's steel had been forged with techniques passed down through generations of mastersmiths, each fold and temperline a testament to the accumulated wisdom of artisans who understood that true quality could not be rushed or compromised. The stock's grain patterns flowed like captured water, creating visual harmonies that spoke of trees that had grown in sacred groves where the spirits of the ancestors still walked among the living. The morning sun had reached its peak, casting the entire scene in harsh, unforgiving light that seemed to strip away pretense and reveal the true nature of each participant in this drama of human worth and moral choice. The warrior's shadow fell across the platform like a protective canopy, its darkness providing a moment of respite from the glare that had begun to make the assembled crowd shift uncomfortably in the growing heat. The auctioneer's voice had lost much of its earlier confidence, the practiced cadence faltering as he attempted to process an offer that defied his understanding of how such transactions were supposed to proceed. The man's experience had taught him to reduce human beings to inventories of potential labor and service, but the warrior's presence had introduced elements that could not be quantified according to the crude arithmetic of frontier commerce. The weapon's weight seemed to increase as the moment of transfer approached, not from any physical change, but from the accumulation of meaning that had gathered around this act of sacrifice. The rifle represented more than personal loss. It embodied the warrior's commitment to principles that placed the protection of the innocent above considerations of personal comfort or security. Each component of the weapon carried with it the memory of successful hunts that had fed his people through harsh winters, of defensive actions that had protected sacred places from desecration, of ceremonies where it had been blessed by medicine men who understood its role as more than mere tool. The exchange was about to be completed, and with it would come a transformation that would alter the destinies of all who witnessed this moment, when moral courage confronted the machinery of human degradation and emerged victorious through the simple act of one soul recognizing the sacred worth of another. The transfer of the rifle from the warrior's hands to those of the auctioneer marked a moment of transformation that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of reality surrounding the platform. The weapon's weight shifted from one set of arms to another, but its true significance transcended the mere physical exchange of property. In that instant, the warrior felt a piece of his identity separate from him like a departing spirit, yet simultaneously experienced a profound sense of completion that spoke to the fulfillment of a destiny long written in the stars above the mountain peaks where his ancestors rested. The auctioneer's hands trembled slightly as they closed around the rifle's stock, his fingers struggling to comprehend the true value of what he now held. The weapon's craftsmanship spoke of worth that extended far beyond the crude calculations of frontier commerce, its every component representing hours of skilled labor and generations of accumulated wisdom. The man's eyes widened as he examined the intricate beadwork and carved symbols that adorned the stock, recognizing, even through his limited understanding, that he held something approaching the sacred. The woman's restraints fell away with a metallic chime that seemed to echo through the settlement, like the ringing of temple bells announcing the dawn of a new age. Her wrists bore the angry red marks of Iron's embrace, but her spirit had already begun to soar beyond the physical reminders of her captivity. The first tentative movement of her freed hands spoke of a soul rediscovering its own agency, fingers flexing and extending as if testing the reality of liberation after what had seemed an eternity of bondage. The crowd's reaction manifested as a collective intake of breath, the sound resembling the whisper of wind through canyon walls when storm systems collide above the high desert. The assembled bidders found themselves witnessing something that defied their understanding of how such transactions were supposed to unfold, their expectations shattered by an exchange that operated according to principles entirely foreign to their experience of frontier commerce and human commodification. The warrior's eyes met those of the woman as she stepped down from the platform, and in that moment of connection, passed an understanding that transcended the need for spoken words. Her gratitude flowed between them like a river of light, while his satisfaction came not from any sense of heroism, but from the simple knowledge that he had acted in accordance with the teachings of his ancestors and the demands of his own conscience. The exchange had cost him dearly, yet had enriched him in ways that no material possession could ever achieve. The rifle now rested in the auctioneer's possession like a caged eagle, its true nature constrained by the limited vision of its new owner. The weapon would likely be sold again, passed from hand to hand until it found its way to someone who might appreciate its craftsmanship, if not its spiritual significance. Yet the warrior felt no regret for its loss, understanding that some sacrifices transcended personal attachment and entered the realm of moral necessity. The woman's first steps as a free person carried her away from the platform with a dignity that had never been diminished despite her ordeal. Her movement through the crowd created its own ripples of awareness, some faces showing approval, while others revealed the bitter disappointment of those whose darker intentions had been thwarted by an act of unexpected nobility. The morning sun seemed to shine more brightly upon her liberated form, as if the very heavens approved of the transaction that had restored her agency. The settlement of Copper Ridge would remember this day long after the dust had settled and the crowds had dispersed, the story becoming part of the oral tradition that bound frontier communities together through shared witness to moments when ordinary circumstances gave birth to extraordinary acts of human decency and moral courage. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the settlement as the warrior and the woman made their way beyond the boundaries of Copper Ridge, their figures gradually diminishing against the vast canvas of the high desert until they appeared as mere specks moving through a landscape that seemed to stretch toward infinity. Behind them, the settlement continued its daily rhythms, but something fundamental had shifted in the moral atmosphere of the place, as if the morning's events had introduced a new element into the spiritual chemistry of the community that would continue to work its influence long after the immediate participants had departed. The woman walked with increasing confidence as the distance grew between herself and the platform, where she had faced the prospect of a fate worse than death. Each step carried her further from the nightmare of commodification and closer to a future that remained undefined, but held the promise of dignity restored. Her torn dress fluttered in the desert breeze like a banner of survival, its faded blue fabric catching the light in ways that transformed it from a symbol of degradation into a testament to endurance and the indomitable nature of the human spirit. The warrior's horse followed behind them with the patient loyalty of a creature that understood its role in events larger than its own comprehension. The animal's hoofbeats created a steady rhythm against the packed earth, a percussion that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the land itself as it welcomed these travelers who moved across its surface with respect rather than the arrogant presumption of conquest that characterized so many who sought to impose their will upon the wilderness. The rifle's absence created a phantom weight that the warrior felt with each movement, a reminder of the sacrifice that had purchased this woman's freedom and his own spiritual liberation. Yet as the miles accumulated beneath their feet, he began to understand that some losses were actually gains in disguise, that the surrender of material possessions could sometimes clear space for more valuable acquisitions of the soul. The weapon had served its highest purpose, not in taking life but in preserving it, not in destruction but in the act of creation that had brought forth this moment of redemption. The desert landscape around them seemed to pulse with approval, the sage and juniper releasing their fragrances into the warming air like incense offered in celebration of justice accomplished. The distant mountains stood as silent witnesses to their passage, their peaks crowned with snow that caught the afternoon light and transformed it into cascades of silver and gold that seemed to bless the travelers with the approval of the ancient spirits who dwelt in the high places. The woman's transformation continued with each mile they traveled, her posture straightening and her stride lengthening as the psychological weight of her ordeal gradually lifted from her shoulders. The warrior observed this metamorphosis with the satisfaction of one who had witnessed the restoration of natural order, the return of dignity to one who had been temporarily stripped of it by the cruelty and greed of those who had forgotten their own humanity in the pursuit of profit. As evening approached and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the warrior knew that their paths would soon diverge. The woman belonged to a world of settlements and civilization, while his destiny lay among the high peaks and hidden valleys where his people maintained their ancient ways. Yet the bond forged between them through this shared experience would endure beyond physical separation, a connection of souls that had recognized each other across the artificial barriers erected by society. The settlement of Copper Ridge faded into memory behind them, but the story of what had transpired there would live on in the oral traditions of both their peoples. Children yet unborn would hear the tale of the warrior who traded his most precious possession for the freedom of a stranger, and in that telling would learn something essential about the nature of true wealth and the courage required to act according to conscience rather than convenience. The desert night embraced them with its ancient peace, and the stars above bore witness to the completion of a sacred transaction that had transformed them both. Thank you for joining us for another Indigenous Love Stories journey. If this story made your heart beat a little faster, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments which part touched you the most. Every gesture helps carry these tales of love, courage, and hope even further. Until our next ride.